Welcome, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're coming from. We're just going to let people come into the room for just the next couple of minutes, and then we'll get started. For those of you requiring translation, we will have Arabic and French translation for this session. There is an interpretation button at the bottom of your screen. If you click on the three dots at the bottom of the Zoom window that says More, you should see a globe, which represents interpretation. Please choose the right channel. Those of you who are joining in English, please join English. Those of you joining in Arabic, please choose Arabic. And those joining in French, please choose French. And that way you'll get the simultaneous interpretation as we speak. Few more minutes as we get more participants joining. Please also open up your chat. There are instructions in the chat for everybody. I will be going over them out loud, but go ahead and read those. Give it one more minute and we'll start. Okay, I've got a few more people coming in, but a really good size audience now. So why don't we get started? Can everyone hear me? Someone give me a wave. Yes, great. Okay, welcome everybody to this webinar, Reform or Repeat, Honest Reflections on Localization Commitments 1 year after the Humanitarian Reset. My name is Christina Bennett. I am the Chief Executive of START Network, and I'm so pleased to be doing this session along with the Humanitarian Practice Network, a longtime partner of START Network, and also an organization close to my heart. I used to work there. So anyway, really great to be doing it with all of you. Before we get started, I just wanted to go over a few housekeeping details. First, please everybody open your chat. We will not have time for introductions. It's just a short hour today. So please put your name and organization in the chat. That goes for panelists as well as participants so that we know who's here. As I said earlier, we will have French and Arabic interpretation for this session. The way you access it is you go to the bottom of your Zoom screen. There are the three dots over the word More. There should be a little globe icon in there that will allow you to select English, French, or Arabic. If you are participating in English, please make sure you choose English, and then French, and then Arabic, depending on the interpretation language that you require. We're recording this session, so just be aware of that. We'll be able to use clips and the full recording. We'll be able to send that out afterwards. We would ask all of you to keep yourselves on mute and off camera, and that's so that we have a chance for the panelists to engage in a discussion for this webinar. We will not have time for Q&A today, which is unfortunate, but please, please, please put your questions in the chat. We will use those questions for any follow-up that we need to do, but also to inform the next set of webinars that we will have, because this is a first in a series of webinars that we're doing called Starting Point. Notice the word start in there. It's a series of discussion with START Network members and with the rest of the sector on issues that are of concern to us, that are shaping our sector today. This first one on the Humanitarian Reset is really on its anniversary. It's about a year since Tom Fletcher, the Emergency Relief Coordinator, put out the Humanitarian Reset and launched it. And we just wanted to reflect not only about how the Humanitarian Reset has affected the sector, but primarily how it's reflected, how it's been experienced by local organizations during its first year. Has it changed anything for your organizations? Has it changed anything in your context? Are we just going over old ground? We're going to get a little bit into what our panelists think of all of that, a little bit into, if the reset is to be successful, under what terms are you going to agree to what it's been saying? What does the international system need to stop, start, or continue to make the reset effective for all local organizations? And what should its priorities be over the next 12 months? Where has it fallen short in the last year, but what could it do better in the next 12 months? So we're going to get into this with our esteemed group of panelists who we have here today online. Let me get everybody's names up. Whoops. Okay, so first I wanted to introduce our panelists. We have Angelina Niajima, who is the founder and executive director of Hope Restoration South Sudan. Hello, Angelina. Good to see you again. Angelina is also a Start Network member and board member. So good to have you here. We also have Samula Hamidi, who is the director of the Organization for Social and Economic Development in Afghanistan. He's joining us from Kabul today. We've got Amrita Paul from the Asia Pacific Refugee Rights Network, and Bridget Osakwe from the Feminist Humanitarian Network, along with organization. So all of them will be discussing whether or not the problems of the past 2 years that we all know quite well are being addressed to whatever extent by the humanitarian reset. I mean, we've seen so many organizations losing funding. We know on average, Start Network members have lost 40% of their funding, but local organizations have lost up to 60% of their funding. Has that funding loss been devastating to your organizations, or has it in fact created opportunities for you to think differently, for all of us to think differently about what the humanitarian reset would mean for us, but also for the communities with which we work? But before we get into the panel, I wanted to hand over to my colleague who will prime this discussion for us. Naomi Hiekdogo, I hope I pronounced that correctly, is from our advocacy team and the author of the report on localization and the humanitarian reset that forms the basis for this discussion. So Naomi, can I hand over to you to give us a bit of highlights to walk us through your findings on localization and the humanitarian reset before we get into our panel? Naomi, please, over to you.
Thanks so much, Christina, and welcome everyone to our webinar today. I'll just quickly walk through the key findings of the localization paper that has grounded this webinar. So, as highlighted in Start Network's 2024 literature review on localization, there's limited evidence that's been published on the impact of localization at the community level. So we believe that this kind of contributes to the ongoing hesitancy that we've seen across the sector to shift power and resources to local actors. So essentially, this paper builds on that gap and demonstrates that locally led humanitarian action is both more equitable and more effective, particularly within the context of the humanitarian reset, as Christina outlined, which seeks to refocus aid and transfer power through the four pillars: define, deliver, devolve, and defend. So, drawing on a recent Start Fund evaluation, data and member case studies, this paper shows that locally led responses are consistently faster, deliver higher quality, more cost effective, and more accountable aid driven by factors such as proximity, trust by communities, and conceptual knowledge of the area. So, next slide, please. Thank you. So just some context on the Start Fund evaluation before we get into the key findings. So the evaluation essentially investigated how far the Start Fund's rapid funding mechanism has come to enable locally led action. So it's assessed the external impact achieved by locally led action through the domains of effectiveness, equitable partnerships, efficiency, and accountability to populations. And at the back of that, it's also proposed a framework to continue to assess the external impact of locally led action moving forward. So the recommendations that have come at the back of this evaluation have contributed significantly and continue to contribute to finding new ways for the Start Fund to not only increase funding, access to funding to local and national actors, but also looking at governance structures to influence the wider humanitarian sector to shift decision-making power in all of its forms closer to the communities that we work with through webinars such as this. Next slide, please. So really briefly, just quickly to touch upon the methodology used for the evaluation. So the evaluation draws on a mixed method evidence base, combining both quantitative and qualitative data across multiple contexts, to assess the performance of locally led versus internationally led responses. So through that kind of comparative analysis between LNGO-led and INGO-led projects across the key indicators as timeliness, quality, fairness, and accountability. The community perception and data collected directly from crisis-affected populations and project-level monitoring data, including delivery, timelines, and cost per beneficiary. So as you can see here, the different types of qualitative research that were used, interviews, focus groups, and case studies to really understand why differences occur, particularly the role of proximity trust and local decision making. So what this means overall is that the findings are statistically grounded and globally representative and directly informed by affected communities. So this methodology allows us to kind of move beyond more anecdotal evidence bases to demonstrate systematic performance differences linked to locally led action through this comparative approach. Next slide, please. So our key findings from the Start Fund evaluation that were highlighted in this paper. So we saw that in the eyes of the communities affected by crisis, LNGO-led projects were rated higher than those led by INGO projects. So in the areas of reaching people and communities faster, improved quality and relevance of aid. The aid ensured more fairer and more accountable assistance, and lastly, strengthened participation and trust of community members affected by crisis. Next slide, please. So the kind of first key finding here, as mentioned, is that LNGO-led projects were able to deliver quicker and more tailored responses and higher quality aid in the eyes of communities affected by crisis. So the data shows that with 95% of communities reporting timely assistance versus 53% in ING-led projects as a result of the existing presence, networks, and access enabling them to reach hard to access and conflict affected areas more quickly. Additionally, given the proximity and existing presence, this also enabled strong anticipatory action where local organizations can not only act early but at scale. And secondly, better quality, more relevant aid, as 87% of community members rated locally led responses excellent, compared to 49% of INGO-led projects, due to the more context-specific, culturally attuned, and flexible responses. Notably, another key finding, but is not exclusively kind of key to the arguments of localization, but definitely important in the context of the funding cuts that we're seeing in the sector, is that we, through locally led projects, more impact was had for less. So as cost per beneficiary halved in locally led projects, we saw that this went down from £22.37 to £10.16, whilst actually increasing for INGO-led projects, so from £15.48 per beneficiary to £19.27. Next slide, please. So the second key finding is locally led action leads to better community participation and influence. So through having locally led responses, the projects were able to move from kind of beyond consultation to actually meaningfully engaging the community to influence and design and the delivery of projects. So the data showed that the higher trust and use of feedback systems, whereby 80% um, awareness/use of feedback channels were known to community members versus 74% of in within ING-led projects, enabling real-time adjustments. So more relevant needs-driven assistance, whereby 98.8% said that aid met their needs compared to 88.5% INGO-led, driven by the continuous engagement and trust. And also what really came through here was the greater accountability in practice as local presence helps to build a trusted two-way relationship with communities actively shaping and monitoring responses. Next slide, please. Thank you. Thirdly, the findings suggest that locally led responses increase community and organizational preparedness and coping capacity. So through the locally led responses, the evaluation showed that responses consistently delivered faster relief and can, in the short term, strengthen preparedness and coping capacity of local and national organizations, helping communities to anticipate shocks, access timely information and assistance, and protect health and livelihoods. So, durable resilience, however, depends on the organizational resilience of local and national organizations, including their institutional continuity, trusted relationships, and ability to sustain preparedness, anticipatory action over time. The evaluation showed that in LNGO-led projects, 96.4% of respondents said that assistance prepared them for future shocks, compared to 41% in INGO-led projects, showing that LNGO's deep community roots foster trust, enabled access to harder to reach areas, and allowed rapid action during crisis. Next slide, please. So the kind of last key finding that stood out in the evaluation was that locally led responses led to fairer and more accountable aid. So nearly 97.6% of community members described the aid distribution under local leadership as very fair compared to 45.6% in INGO-led projects. And communities not only know how to raise issues, but feel comfortable doing so, which enables local national organizations to adjust responses more quickly. So the findings show that nearly all community members, that's 98.8%, said assistance from LNGOs met their needs, compared to 88.5% for INGO-led projects. Next slide, please. So from the evidence from the evaluation shows that locally led action, it does work, but ultimately power hasn't shifted adequately. Locally led responses deliver faster and more relevant and more accountable responses when local actors do lead. Yet we see that funding, risk, and governance still sit with international actors. A quote that I've pulled out from the paper that really resonates to this point from Ali Mohammed Ali, the Deputy Executive Director of GREDO, cautions that complementarity must not become a permanent justification for retained control. What real reform looks like equates to is a tangible shift in power. Who actually sets the priorities and makes the decisions? Who controls and allocates funding? And who carries the financial, operational, and reputational risk? Accountability must indeed drive this shift, and donors and agencies must change funding flows to more direct and flexible financing, transfer decision-making authority and governance roles to local actors, and share risk equitably and not pass it down the chain. And progress will be measured by power control shifts and not just the percentage of funding. Thank you so much for listening to the recap on the findings from the localization works paper. Over to you, Christina.
Great. Thanks so much, Naomi, for all of that good data. From what that report surfaced, localization works, right? We've seen it in the statistics, right? It's faster, it's more, the assistance is of higher quality, it's more relevant, and it sort of solves that continuum between like being more prepared, it prepares communities all the way through to responding to needs, but also reducing risk for the next disaster, whether it's conflict or climate. You also noted that the cost per beneficiary went down, and I'm always a bit uncomfortable with people justifying localization based on value for money. I'm not sure that's the right way of thinking about it, but it's a data point. And in this era of funding cuts, it's a good data point, and something that should bolster our arguments for the fact that localization works. But I want to turn over to the panel now because what Naomi's just laid out is, the case from all sorts of angles as to why localization works. But have you felt that with the humanitarian reset that it is working? That it is the humanitarian reset, which is supposed to be about shifting power, shifting resources, shifting governance. Has it led to a changed situation in your context? So maybe I will go first to Angelina. Hi, Angelina. Just to ask you, maybe just to open us up. In the past 14 months, since this humanitarian reset has been put forward, what does it look like in South Sudan? Has the humanitarian reset led to reforms in South Sudan? Have communities been placed at the center of that decision making? Have you felt those power shifts? Have you felt that shift in resources? Why or why not?
Thank you so much, Christina, and thanks also, Naomi, for great presentation. Well, from the point of view in South Sudan, I think it has not yet shown any shift. It's just almost the way we were before. Because when we talk of shifting power, people need to be at the center. But then when we talk of the shift, and we still leave the vast majority who are the national actors in terms of where key decisions are being made, it's still a struggle because I feel some decisions are being made maybe by few individuals where local actors happen not to be in those high tables. And when those decisions are made, they affect us as the national organization or national actors. It also affects our communities. Because if those decisions are being made by people who did not live the suffering that people are in, then it creates a lot of questions. Are we intentionally doing the right shift, or we are repeating what we've been doing for a very long time, a different format that we call? And when you look at it from the other side again, a local actor might be in the space where you will give your opinion, but very few spaces will take your voice as something for decision. And that has worked because when people say we need to have local actors at the center, and you will get in some places, there will be local actors that will be there for ticking the boxes. And that's not what we want. We want intentional representation where we make decisions, our communities that are affected also make decisions on what they want, not what the donor really want. Thank you.
Angelina, thanks for that. So what you're basically saying is nothing's changed the way you see it, that the conversations haven't changed, the power hasn't shifted. But what with such a focus in the humanitarian reset on centering communities, What is not happening? What do you think is going wrong? Where is the reset falling short? Can you give me a specific?
Where the research is falling short is because it's more on a paper than it's being implemented. Because it's a very good suggestion. We've seen it being discussed, but is it being implemented? That's where the problem comes. Because if it's being implemented, and I can give you a practical example of what just happened to us about the grant that was given to my country, where decisions were made without local actors being part of it. And I can break it down. 70% of that grant went to UN agencies, 26% went to INGOs, and 6% went to the national organization. So if we were put in the center of that discussion, it will be a different figure coming in. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Angelina. Are you referring to the US money that was recently reallocated by OCHA? Yeah, okay. Great. Interesting that
Yes.
that OCHA put out the humanitarian reset, but then, because of the restrictions on that US funding, isn't necessarily making good on those promises. Amrita, you are part of a network of refugee-led organizations. Does it look differently from your perspective? Does the humanitarian reset show up in a different way for refugee-led organizations?
Yeah, I was finding it a bit difficult to unmute myself. Cool.
Got it. We can
Um,
hear you.
yes, thanks. I think what I'll do is I'll again reiterate what my previous speaker has said, and I'm going to name it as a paradox. The humanitarian reset was last year, of course, in the aftermath of the US aid, and we all know that it's not changed much. But finally, we were having conversations about finally centering local actors. But a year, 14 months have gone by. But what we actually in practice see is that localization has become harder and not easier at all. So, from where we at Apron sit, we see a genuinely mixed bag. We see a lot of organizations have been able to reposition and have been able to secure funding. But when it comes to organizations, because we work very closely with refugee led organizations, community based organizations, they are experiencing the sharpest of difficulties. They are the ones who embody and they are the ones who are being targeted for localization. But there is a really sharp difficulty that they're facing. There's also another gap that we often see and we often are able to bridge, but it is there. It's the profound information gap. There are so many of these frameworks that are being thought out very well, with well thought out, very well intentioned frameworks. A lot of funding windows, a lot of opportunities, and changing priorities. But this piece of information is not really reaching the community level actors. Whereas what the community level actor in the camps, in the community setting see is erasure of funds, cuts on their food supplies, reducing access to health, closure of schools and learning centers. So where are they landing up? With severe structural barriers that they face in non-signatory states, because the context is Asia and Pacific, and bulk of your non-signatory states to the Refugee Convention lies there. They are in this quagmire that you do not have a framework of protection. You were hoping to continue in the current given environment, but with such severe funding cuts, where do they go? They're literally running from pillar to post. So where that is where Apron comes in, and we have an intermediary role that we are playing. We can talk about it during the discussion that ensues.
Thanks very much for that, Amrita. You mentioned a little bit about how some of those frameworks are in place, and yet you don't see the sort of tangible implementation of those frameworks, whether it's the reset or the refugee frameworks that you were mentioning. I was just in Guatemala to meet with our hub there, and there was a bit of discussion as to whether or not localization has become kind of performative. And what I mean by that is it is being enacted in name only, that a lot of people are talking about it, a lot of people referring to commitments and frameworks, but that the actual tangible progress falls short of the commitments made. That in fact, certain organizations are using the localization mantra to raise funds for themselves, or to promote themselves in ways that aren't actually benefiting local organizations. Is that something that you have seen? You're nodding your head. So wondering if
Yes.
there's anything that you've seen in the Asia context that resonates with that.
Yeah, to respond to you, Christina, on that, that's why I used, some of the organizations are able to reposition themselves, and that's how they secure funding. And that's where, the funds are being, otherwise that could have gone to community-led or refugee-led organizations, could have been actually diverted to them. But they're, because these are organizations who already have frameworks, reporting frameworks, compliance standards. They have these teams who can handle this entire bulk of, report, sending proposals, writing in a language that the donors understand, and the language that most often the refugee-led organizations may lack. It's something that can be bridged. It can something that capacity can be built, but that's become the difference, and that's how this repositioning is playing out.
Thanks
Uh,
for that. Thanks, Amrita. Bridget, you are nodding your head as Amrita was speaking, and I'm wondering, from your perspective, leading a feminist humanitarian network, from your perspective, do you see the same things? Are women-led organizations being sidelined in the same way? Are they able to overcome? Are they able to take up the localization mantra and assert their power in this discussion, or they feel like they still can't?
Thank you. Think for us, it's the same thing. The story is the same. Whether from Asia or from South Sudan, the story is the same because these 14 months have not felt like reform. Women's rights organizations, groups, and feminist movements like ours have been asked to, who have stretched ourselves thin beyond the resources that we already have. Funding has been reduced. It has become very rigid and more risk averse. And we are being asked to do more with less while carrying the emotional and political labor. And this is are reflected in the submission. But for, more concretely, the Feminist Humanitarian Network is still holding our report for 2025 captured it very clearly, where this the report cuts across Asia, Africa, and Latin America, and the Caribbean, where it reflects how women's rights organizations, women with disability, and all diverse groups of women describe their reality, where they could not respond as frontlines while absorbing the shock in a very shrinking system. These women's rights organizations and leaders that are holding the communities together with their resources and in these shrinking spaces. So for many grassroots organizations, this has meant shrinking spaces. In some aspects, pausing programs or quietly closing down shops. It has meant for some leaders to absorb costs personally. Secondly, communities are losing trust. In these trusted spaces that they have, like Angelina was saying, this relationship with local women's rights organizations, communities are losing trusted spaces of care and organizing. And at the same time, international actors have not withdrawn their influence. at the same spaces as their funding. So for us, power has not shifted. It has indeed tightened. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Bridget. So what we've heard from our first three speakers to the answer to the question I originally posed, has the humanitarian reset made a difference in your context? I think the answer is no. From the context of shifting power, shifting decision making, the primacy of local organizations in humanitarian action. But there are a few comments I've noticed in the chat of a few people commenting first that, with such severe funding cuts across the sector for international organizations, is localization just a luxury now that they cannot afford because they are also in organizational survival mode? And another point too, Angelina, you mentioned the U.S. Funding being distributed in a way that was not supporting localization, and Kevin from World Vision in the chat has said, but aren't we conflating two things? The reset came way before that U.S. money was available, and the U.S. money comes with lots of ties, lots of rules around it. So, is it unfair to talk about the reset in the context of the U.S. funding because they're two different things? So those are just two comments that were made in the chat. But maybe turning to my final two panelists that we have not heard from on this question of the reset and has it made a difference? From a funding perspective, right? The cuts have really sort of forced the reset, forced the conversation around reform. But we've heard about reform many times in the past, and this is kind of forcing the sector to rethink itself. Maybe looking at you, Sami, is from the context of the humanitarian reset and funding cuts, is the fact that we are all suffering from reduced funding going to be a catalyst for change? Is it going to be one of those moments where something new and possible can emerge? Or is it going to, as people have written in the chat, is it just going to kind of give everybody the excuse to retreat into their corners and say, look, we're all suffering from this. We all have to support our organizations, and things like localization are a luxury we can't afford. So I guess, is funding going to be the catalyst for change, or is funding going to be the excuse for inertia?
Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Angelina. I think you started us with a really good perspective on what's happening, and I think the other colleagues who had their perspectives represents what the report basically captures, not only Afghanistan, but it takes us over many countries, telling us what's happening not at a local level but globally. And I think I just love this panel that represents that report as well. Um, I think this reset in the context of Afghanistan is more of a reorganization of the same rather than true transformation. We're not seeing true transformation, and I think that reflects Amrita's point on we have frameworks, but what is the actual work that's happening? And also building on Bridget's point on communities are losing trust. And I think for some organizations, localization is a strategy to shore up funding and to survive. Like it was said earlier, I think that's a point. For some, it's a matter of accessing funds. For some, it's a matter of whether people or the communities that we support are helped. And localization could mean different things for those who are within the system that is in place, who are now reorganizing and adapting to localization than transformation. So I think this would confirm what other colleagues said in this call is the reset is reorganization. It's not a true transformation, and we're not seeing any sign of that happening. This pressure that is in place is more like a superficial justification of why the same has to continue. And from my point of view, it's not about more funding to local organization. It's more about, are they part of the thinking? Are local organizations and communities part of the reset, the way locals understand it? And I think a lot of the work, that the change that is happening, it trickles up and it loses its true local version. It's so sanitized and so abstracted. As it reaches where it really matters, it's not recognizable. And I think the same system that we expect to generate the reset is basically a loop feeding itself. It's the same system informing its same frameworks, the same mindset. And I don't think the results will be any different. And I think that's why, again, I come back to the trust. The communities are now waiting for the same system to deliver. And I think that's why the call for a different localization or a different narrative where people are part of the ideation and the design and the narrative in the storytelling. And again, just to respond to your question, Christina, we haven't seen, I haven't seen, and I think the people that I've been in contact with haven't seen the silo being open. I think the system locally in Afghanistan remains a slightly larger silo. And I think there is no turnover, there is no entrance for new thoughts and new ideas. And this rigidity will break the system. And I think localization was supposed to fix the dynamics. And Afghanistan, the way we see it, the system that is dominant and in place is not open to that kind of thinking. New thoughts, new ideas are rejected because they're not compatible. They're not even understood because it's an echo chamber, a really big echo chamber where the same system validates itself over and over. And I'm not seeing, and we're not seeing any different results. But again, thanks to I mean the world is more connected, and we're seeing more and more people learning what true localization should look like, and why the current approach, as we see it, is a superficial restructuring of the same. It's not a transformation. It's just the system adapting to just have another face or show a different superficial level adherence to what the world wants it to do. Because I think I think that's what it is. It's reacting, it's adapting, and it's not true transformation. The reset is not true transformation.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks for that, Sami. Kulmie, are you here? I can't see you. Are you on camera?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great,
Interesting.
fantastic. Kulmie, listen,
Yeah.
you've heard from four of your fellow panelists that the answer to my question, has the reset made a difference? A resounding no, for lots of different reasons. Is there anything that you've seen in the Somalia context that suggests that there is movement somewhere, that the reset has managed to, whether it's fostering a global conversation or its awareness, if not true change? Is there anything that we can take away from the reset that has meant something positive? Or do you agree with your fellow panelists that really we are back to where we started?
Well, thanks and good afternoon, everyone. Greeting from Mogadishu. My name is Hussein Kulmie, the Executive Director and Chair for Partnership and Localization Working Group in Somalia under the Somalia NGO Consortium. Thanks, Christine, for the question. I think it's a very tough question when it comes to reality on the ground in the sector reforms. But when it comes to Somalia, perhaps there could be a different opinion in regards to what my speakers earlier said, although we share common many of the things they have also highlighted. Because of Somalia context, Somalia is both a test and opportunity for any reform, from cash transfer in history, from localization, the grand bargain, and the reset now. It has been an opportunity and a test. And Somalia is not discussing localization now as a theoretical future agenda, but we are discussing it as every day we have it as an operational issue in a very complex, most complex world humanitarian context. And for national and local NGOs, they sit at the heart of any humanitarian response in Somalia. So we are in the driver's seat, we are in the front line, and we have been positioned for many years, more than 4 decades now, leading the response. And I think that gives Somalia, why I have said earlier, it's a test or also an opportunity. However, the humanitarian reset has come at a critical moment also when all of us have been seeing what happened in terms of the global funding scale. We are carrying as Somalia NGOs, national NGOs, an increasing operational coordination and responsibility amid all these global reforms and the funding cuts. Frankly speaking, Somalia has repeatedly demonstrated a locally led action, and local NGOs sustain presence in hard-to-reach areas, high-risk areas. There's a critical community trust. The community trusts the local NGOs than any other person because we are with them always there, and will remain there forever. And the national NGOs has continued to maintain that, continuity, whether there is insecurity or political transformations or transition or donor withdrawals. So we are living with them. So the trust aspect from the community perspective is critical for us in Somalia. The honest reflection in regards to the reform, the humanitarian reset. Somalia, as I said earlier, experienced multiple cycles of humanitarian reforms, from the grand bargain to transformation agendas like now. Now the humanitarian reset, my fear is it might repeat the past patterns. If localization is limited to consultation, implementation roles, and symbolic participation. Many have echoed this, the speakers before me. So from where I sit, what is genuine localization? A genuine localization is the one that shared power, decision-making are balanced, resource distribution are balanced, and fair funding, predictable funding, with a deliberate institutional focus, capacity strengthening, and risk-sharing ownership. So this is missing. And if humanitarian reset is not addressing these concerns, then we will only just be normal as the previous reforms, which says delivering aid more cheaply, absorption operations, compliance, focus on compliance, avoidance rather than risk sharing, and filling the gaps created by shrinking international funding. So I think in regards to what my colleagues, I think in regards to the question, Somalia has partially, this is where my difference comes, has partially seen in fronting and the change humanitarian reset is making from a number of ways. And I can give this classical example from Somalia context. And this meaningful or positive changes or working, let me say working, is the flagship project, which has been implemented 100% by local NGOs, and the decision-making has been cascaded to district level, from national level to regional level to national level. So that makes sense to us, and that makes sense that reset has element of changes than what other reforms used to be. The area-based coordination is another one, where the local actors are sitting. And increased representation, of course, but remunerated is where now the shift now we are talking is not about numerical strength in terms of representation, but we're talking about remunerated and decision-making positions for local organizations. What leadership, in terms of leadership. So that is our focus. And if that the reset can help us do, then it is a positive thing. We have also a number of initiatives, local organizations are implemented. The State Network Fund is many of our partners, local organizations, are also members and they have coordinators, and they do implement directly. And Together program is another program funded by GFFO through a number of international organizations and local organizations making the decisions. So I can give examples as many as, as I can give, but the bottom line is that localization, humanitarian reset without resources, without giving power, giving decision making, it will be the same as in other reforms. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Hussein. You've identified then a slightly more positive outlook than your colleagues. And for me, it sounded to me like the critical ingredient for why you see things moving in Somalia, whether it's area-based coordination or the flagship reform from a few years ago being implemented by local organizations with them in the lead. It is around decision making. It is around local organizations taking up the reins and making decisions for themselves rather than things being imposed. So I'm going to go back to my other panelists now and ask you two questions. One, do you see room for complementarity? There was a quote that Naomi had at the beginning and as part of her report that complementarity is being used as a justification for control. That true complementarity between international and local organizations is not possible. It is being used to justify additional control. Do you agree with that statement, number one? And number two, if there was one thing that we could go back to Tom Fletcher about at the end of this and say, this is the key ingredient for making the humanitarian reset or localization work in my context, what would it be? So I'm going to go back first to Bridget. Two questions. Complementarity possible or justification for control? And second, what in terms of the feminist network that you run, what would make the reset successful?
Thank you so much. I wish we could be as optimistic as the Somalia example, but from our end, it's a no for now. In the truest form of complementarity, it means that each player, each actor plays the role they have, that they are best placed in where they have their capacities as defined by those in the role or in the setting. In the colloquialist, we say putting the round pole on the right. But what I am trying to say here is that each player played the role that they are best placed to play in the complementarity form. And that this does not mean that international actors should be stepping in by default. It does mean that parallel systems operating without accountability to each other. Here, the issue of accountability is very important. And what I think that it means that local actors to lead the way my Somalia brother has described it. And that because they are rooted within the community, they will still remain there. We will continue to be there within the community. But that the women's rights organizations, who are the local actors, should not be used as guinea pig for experiments. And that international actors should support where there is genuine need, instead of ticking the boxes. In this context, I think that roles can be negotiated and not
Great.
assumed, and not assumed. But from my own stand, equitable relationship like this means shared decision-making power from the start. It means direct funding without unnecessary intermediaries. It means mutual accountability, where even the donors are answerable to. And then there's the issue of respect for political analysis, especially feminist and community perspectives. Then there's one thing that Amrita had talked about, fair compensation, including how to sustain the women's rights organizations. And this means that it moves resources, not control.
Bridget, thank you so much for that. I'm going to move to the next panelist. Amrita, Bridget has just said that complementarity for her is roles are negotiated, not assumed. And in that way, complementarity is not an excuse for power. And that things like accountability, decision making, direct funding are the prerequisites for a successful reset in the context of the network that she runs. Does that does that sound the same or different from where you sit?
It's somewhat same, so I'm just going to rework the words. And I would just say that complementarity for us, from where we stand, should not become a polite way of describing a hierarchy and should not just, sugarcoat it. It should really, like a genuine example of complementarity, should be where international actors use their access to donors and open doors for local actors. And that's pretty much what we had the goal when we started out with the reset and for our attempts towards towards localization. I think I'll give you an example for that just to illustrate it. Often one sees when you have these, agreements and these fund transfers, you often see this architecture of the funding application. And one of the key standouts is the transfer of risk. And often one sees that the funding architecture is very short grants, not a lot of flexibility, um, very few instances of coverage of overhead costs or personnel costs, but fully outsourcing the risk. That is where equitable partnership completely fails. And we need to be mindful of that. And that is something we should continue to work towards. And in that respect, I'll just tie in, what for me would look like if this reset needs to work. It needs to, we need to think about who is governing this, who is at the seat of table, who is actually taking the decision. And I will come back to all the panelists, and we've always said it right from the get go. We need to think about the power imbalance and we need to balance it out. We need to get the people who are at the heart of this localization effort to sit on that table, to take those decisions because they know best. They know what they are coming from. They know what the terrain that they're working with and for whom, because they are from that terrain. So if we don't get them on the table, we will not find a solution.
Thanks, Amrita. Very, very clear. Angelina, it's not about, according to Amrita, it's not as much about money as it is about governance. Having that decision-making power, having the seat at the table, being part of the leadership of the decisions that are being made in this sector is where the humanitarian reset could make a difference. And that the right way to look at complementarity is about risk sharing and not risk transfer. Do you agree, Angelina? Do you have a different perspective?
I totally agree with her because I think that is where the friction always come in. Because most of the time people talk of risk transfer, but then the question is, what kind of risk are you transferring? Does it come with resources? The risk you are transferring, because you are transferring it to a local partner that might not have the required capacity, the required resources, the required structure in place. So if you meaningfully wanted to really do a risk, it should be a risk sharing, not a risk transfer. And that's how I argue it. Because most of the time, those in the hard-rich area, those in the front line are the local actors. These local actors do not even, you start with lack of salaries. They don't even have meaningful salaries they are receiving. That's one. Security. They don't even, they will go to the field. Sometimes you don't even know whether they will come back safe or not because they don't have mobility in place. All those things, when you try to look at making a conducive working environment, has to be organized. But because they're just national organization, they can manage it. It's their communities, they can survive it. And that do not represent us very well. We feel like we are being used, not as a partners, and that comes with a lot of inequality attached to it. And it also comes back to like salaries. When you get the salaries that is being paid to a national organization, the same programs, and the salaries being paid to an INGO, it's almost 3-4 times different. And at the end of the day, it's these local who are doing much of the work. They will bring it and then give to their counterparts. So why do we have such inequality in our space? And
So
when you talk
Angelina,
of
what is the success factor that would make the reset address exactly the problem you're describing?
well, we need chiefing decisions because much decisions are being made when we are excluded. We need to be in those tables. Our voices has to be listened to. We need to influence the decision that is affecting us, affecting our communities, and affecting the environment we are operating. That will later translate to increase to direct resources. But the first thing is we have to be included in decision making. Thank you.
Thanks, Angelina. I just would beg a few more minutes of your time. I know we're at the hour now, but I want to make sure, Sami, you have a chance to weigh in on this question, which is about complementarity, a source of mutual support or a source of control. And what would be the key factor in your mind that would make the humanitarian reset truly transformative?
I believe there should be one sentence, like a motto, that captures what the reset is about. Uh, it could be anything. I mean, this is not original, but I would say it should be like reaching the furthest behind, or reaching communities first, or focusing on outcomes that work for the people. It's the conversation, the discourse is so much about the numbers of the money that goes where and who delivers it. I think what will make the reset more tangible, less abstract, and more understandable by the ordinary people is that it should be able to capture itself through a single sentence. I haven't been able to do that with the reset. I try to do it. It's failing, or maybe it's too early to do that. So I believe recentering communities and not making the reset or localization about NGOs, make it more about what we're there for. It's improving outcomes for the people. And I think that's missing from the discourse and the reset itself. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Sami. Okay. Listen, we've had a great conversation for the last hour. It's been too short, so much in the chat going on. So many good points made by all of you. I want to thank the panelists for your insights. I'm not sure you've painted a completely positive picture of this, but you've given us some really important things to think about. And if I were to provide a motto, I suppose, for the humanitarian reset and what it needs to focus on going forward, it's about who decides means what gets done, or something like that. I think what you've all been saying is it's somewhat about money, but it's a lot about governance and decision making. So maybe it's about who decides means what gets done, something around that. So we will take this discussion, feed it back actually to the architects of the reset to see if they'll listen to some of this. And then we'll be posting some of your comments and videos on social media, and also as part of the website, so that you can look back on what you've said, and the rest of you can look back as to what our fellow panelists discussed. So anyway, just to say thank you for your time. Sorry we've gone over by a few minutes. Really enjoyed the discussion. If only we had another hour or 5. But enjoy the rest of your days, and we'll be in touch with all of our follow-up. Thanks so much to the Humanitarian Practice Network for co-hosting this with us. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
Bye.